It seems that Kenneth Starr continues his rounds of the television talk shows. He was on CNN yesterday, and here is an AP story out of that says he said today he believed the immunity deal that Linda Tripp struck with his office should have protected her against prosecution on state charges in Maryland. And also he said he did not believe his office erred when it allowed a month to pass between receiving tapes of the telephone conversations between Monica Lewinsky and Mrs. Tripp and the time it filed with the immunity agreement with a judge.
Well, the problem is, I guess, that he may have that opinion, but the judge has another opinion in that case. And what his office failed to do was to take that immunity agreement and have it ratified by a judge. And judges tend to respect each other's work. And this judge, in this case, didn't see any judge's approval on the immunity deal until about a month after Starr began to try to get it for Linda Tripp, which has left her very vulnerable to prosecution, as we've seen. There's a month gap there where she continued to tape even though she knew it was against the law, and that is the problem for her in Maryland right now.
Bill Sapphire writes in his column about this issue, but perhaps not in the way you think. The headline on it is "To Stop the Eavesdrop." He starts out with talking about the politics, which he believes are involved in this trial, but he says, the famous Tripp taping of her conversations with Monica, further publicized by this witch hunt in Maryland, may do a lot of good for privacy in America. And he said, I became radicalized about this after learning of being illegally wiretapped in 1969 when I was a Nixon speechwriter.
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent column in that, you know, you expect Bill Sapphire as a conservative to take the side of the opponents of Clinton, which Tripp certainly falls into. But in this case, I think he went with a larger truth, which is that he was offended by the privacy being violated, in this case Monica Lewinsky's privacy being violated by Linda Tripp. And I think anybody who lived through the last year and was exposed to all of the conversations that Monica had with Linda couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. At least I did. I felt that we were listening into somebody's private, vulnerable moments. It was embarrassing. It was humiliating for Monica Lewinsky. To me, it felt ethically wrong for us to be listening in on those conversations, and it felt ethically wrong to me, and it turns out to be possibly legally wrong for Linda Tripp to have been using those tapes and then making them public.
Let's jump into calls. First, Tacoma Park, Maryland, Liberal Line. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Jane.
Yes.
One of the things that I've been watching the presidential people on television and reading about what they said, I find one of the things very distressing. I think that Bush is a very attractive person, seems to have a very pleasant attitude towards being in the public. But what is being neglected is the fact that he is an alcoholic. I have never, ever heard, after the first couple of weeks, the fact that he is an alcoholic. And you know, and the world knows, that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And under stress, whether he may not have been drinking alcohol for the last 11 years.
You have not heard that question come up again?
I want to know why the press absolutely will not discuss it and why it's out of the picture now, because
I have heard, I actually think he has been, this question has been addressed somewhat in that he did say he had a drinking problem. I'm not an expert in alcoholism, so I don't know where a drinking problem becomes alcoholism, but that he gave up drinking on his 40th birthday and has not returned to it since. And I suppose you could think that maybe he would return to it under some circumstances, but he hasn't yet. He's been governor of a very large state. And so I don't know that there's a sense that it's a continuing problem for him. I do think it certainly was, according to all of his best friends and according to himself, a problem. I think it created a great deal of worry, and so he resolved to give up drinking completely when he turned 40. He felt he was in bad shape. He took up running, and he became more religious and committed his life to public service, pretty much. So I don't know that it does continue to be a problem.
Next call's from Modesto, California on the Moderate Line.
Good morning, Susan and guest.
Good morning.
Hi.
I feel that trading with such an unfriendly nation as China is not only risky, but bad business, because presently we have a net loss of $50 billion and about 2.5 million jobs going to China. And now we are very dependent upon China, because if China were to attack or invade Taiwan, our supply for shoes and clothing and so forth would probably be cut off, leading to shortages and higher prices. And we don't need to let China wipe her feet on us trade-wise in order to communicate with her. But our one-sided free traders only mention our exports to China, not what we're losing.
Caller, thanks. Let's get a response from our guest.
Well, I'm not an expert in trade or an expert in China, but clearly there are very divided opinions on this issue, and many people feel that trade will open China's mind to democratic or more democratic kinds of politics, and it would do better than maybe cutting China off. I don't know. This is a debate we see every year, really, and certainly each presidential cycle. And it was interesting that when Clinton ran in '92, he criticized Bush for his position on China, and he now has basically the same position.
The Washington Times has another story from the Sunday shows, this one from Meet the Press with the Gore-Bradley debate. A question asked about Mr. Clinton and whether or not he will seek redress for his legal bills. And it says here that Mr. Gore kept insisting that Mr. Clinton has denied that he and the First Lady will ask for tax dollars to pay for more than $5 million in legal bills. And then it goes on to say, but neither the White House Press Secretary Joe Lockhart nor the President's attorney, David Kendall, has completely ruled out that option in statements to the press over the past few days. A little history. It says here later on in the story that from Joe Lieberman that former Presidents Reagan and Bush were reimbursed for their legal fees from Iran-Contra. I leave it up to Mr. and Mrs. Clinton if they want to take this one on.
Well, I would say this is a classic Washington trial balloon. It was floated over the weekend to see what public reaction might be. I'm sure the Clintons would love to recapture the $5 million that have gone into their legal fees here. And clearly it's a hot potato, since even the Vice President is saying that he would not do it and he wouldn't recommend it. He, as we've watched, Al Gore has been distancing himself somewhat from President Clinton. It's a kind of an awkward act in many ways, as they kind of, as he puts one arm around him and takes the other hand and pushes him away. And this was definitely in the push-away camp.
Next call's from Ella J., Georgia, conservative line.
Yes, Susan, I'd like to ask Jane to comment on the great book written by Bob Novak called Completing the Revolution. I think that's one of the greatest books I've ever read, and I think he would be a great candidate. I think a great ticket that would really energize me and a lot of conservatives would be Buchanan president, Novak vice president, and I'd like to ask Jane's comment on that. And one other thing, Susan, about pork barrel spending, all the $1 million outhouses and all the pork barrel, we have a bunch of us have asked Senator Coverdell from Georgia to lead the fight against pork barrel spending, and ask people like Senator Lott, who's the majority leader of the Senate, and Senator Stevens to step aside, because they're nice people, but I think they're guilty of a lot of pork barrel spending. I'd like to ask Jane what she thinks of the Novak book and also the excessive pork barrel spending.
See Bob Novak as the vice presidential candidate?
Well, I have to say I haven't had the dubious pleasure of reading his book. I do read his column, which I think is always interesting, and since actually Bob Novak has taken a couple swings at me in his column, I can't say that he would be probably getting my vote.
Well, on the second question, let me show you a number. USA Today has on its front page what they say statistics that shape the millennium. There'll be different ones over the next week and a half. And today's is the cost of the federal debt per person. In 1900, it cost each American about $16. I guess there were fewer of us at the time as well. And in 1999, $20,800 is our per-person share of the federal debt. Is this...
Are these in constant dollars, or are these, is this updated for inflation?
No sources. No further explanations.
Because it's probably the same amount of money if it's not, really.
It comes from the monthly statement of the public debt. Let me ask you about the whole question of the debt and pork barrel spending, as this caller talked about. Is this an issue going into 2000?
Well, the debt has been erased to such a large extent that really it's not the issue that it once was. And I don't think that really, I think one of the problems for the Republican Party right now is it's not getting traction on the issues that were traditionally their best sort of wedge issues, as they call them. It's hard for the Republicans to make make the cases they have in the past that taxes have to be cut and that spending has to be cut, because the deficit has been reduced so terrifically during this last Democratic administration, and the economy is doing so well that people aren't really feeling the sting of taxes as much as they used to. I'm not saying they don't feel the sting of taxes, but they're not feeling it as much, and every survey has shown that these are not the issues that are on the front burner of most people's minds right now.
Next call for Jane Mayer is from Clover, South Carolina, Liberal Line.
Hello, Susan.
Morning, sir.
I wanted to ask her a question, and then I wanted to make a comment. And the comment is, you know, they always talk about the media, you know, that it's liberal. Don't you think that the Republicans kind of demagogued that for about 7 years, about the first 4 or 3 years since Clinton came in, to make an excuse for them to put MSNBC, the Fox channel? They got all this, then you just got through with Wall Street to make a good argument, you see, so they can pull in and start slandering everybody and everything else like that, because they say the liberals has got the media, but the liberals might be fair, but I think they're fair. And the other thing is, if the media votes 89% Democrat, they must know the Republicans are doing some pretty bad stuff up there, because they can get the really proof that they can't report.
Thank you.
Well, I guess what I find offensive about the characterizations of the media as being liberal or anything else is that most of the reporters I know, like myself, will write a story, a good piece of news, no matter who it helps and who it hurts. And they may vote one way, but it doesn't mean that you have to slant a story in a particular way. There's a division between news people and opinion people, and I guess it's getting more and more blurred. But I think that by attacking the media as liberal, conservatives have managed to make it sound like there is no neutral ground in the media, and I think that is where most people in the press exist.
We had a bit of discussion about this item in our first hour. I'd like to have your take on it. It's the new CNN Gallup poll that says the numbers have changed about the public and impeachment. Now, 50% of adults surveyed approve of the House impeachment, up from 35% a year ago.
I don't know what accounts for that exactly, except that it's safe now because it's clear that the president's not going to be impeached again, and it's clear that he's not going to be removed from office. So I think there's been this kind of overflowing of kind of anger on the part of Americans who feel that they didn't really want Clinton punished to the extent that he was driven from office, but they're annoyed that in retrospect it's kind of defiled the White House to the extent that it did. I guess Clinton's popularity now is at one of its all-time lows.
Next call is from Lakewood, Pennsylvania, Moderate Line.
Yes, Ms. Mayor,
yes.
If I may, allow me to engage your historical financial neurons. What elemental catalyst is being primed that can severely damage our democracy within the next 12 months that is sadly missing from our political dialogue? I'll give you a little hint. It has nothing to do with the quail potato and rhymes with mash.
You tell me. I don't know. You're going to have to give me a few more hints, or actually, why don't you blurt out the answer?
Oh, okay. I'll state the answer. I won't blurt it out. It's a crash. What we're having now is a system of using excess liquidity, and we're pumping up a stock market that doesn't reflect value in price terms.
Well, there's certainly
for redemption.
I guess, you know, nobody really knows for sure what the answer is to that and whether or not the stock market is too inflated. Most people look at the statements coming from Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who is, you know, sort of the ultimate Mandarin of economic policy, fiscal policy. And he certainly has been regularly trying to dampen expectations, trying to keep things from being, as he put it, irrationally exuberant. Yet at the same time, we keep reading that the whole economy is booming because of the shift towards high tech. And you know, this week Time magazine, I guess, decided to put Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon.com, on its cover as the man of the year. And there's this tremendous kind of celebration going on of high-tech entrepreneurs. And, you know, it's very hard, I think, for people to know how much of this to trust. But meanwhile, there's an awful lot of money being made and a lot of people who are getting rich.
Auburn, Massachusetts, for Jane Mayer. Conservative line. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be on. Jane.
Yes.
I would like you, please, to tell the American people that are listening this morning that you are the journalist who illegally, and I'm going to repeat the word, illegally received the personnel file of Linda Tripp from Kenneth Bacon and his deputy, who have since gone on television and admitted that they did do this. They turned her personnel file over to you to write the article.
That's right. And you know what?
And excuse me, let me finish, please. This is my dime. I've waited a long time to get through to you, Jane. Also, I want you to tell the American people that this is illegal to absolutely turn over any American's personnel file. And I'm wondering if Linda Tripp has filed a lawsuit against you and your minions for doing this, and what will happen to Kenneth Bacon. This man should not even be in his position. He should have been fired immediately by the Secretary of Defense, Cohen. What is your response to this? Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. Well, I guess I can't really come on the air and say that it's illegal, since it's not illegal, and it would be inaccurate to say that it was. What happened was that Ken Bacon answered a question after I discovered from Linda Tripp's mother-in-law that she had an arrest record. Her mother-in-law and I were talking because I was doing a biographical piece about Linda Tripp, and I called the Pentagon to ask them whether or not Linda Tripp had honestly declared that she had an arrest record in order to get her top security clearance, because it's required under law to tell the truth about an arrest record. The Pentagon checked, and lo and behold, Linda Tripp, who had portrayed herself as a truth teller and somebody only concerned with the truth, had not told the truth about her own past. There was nothing at all illegal about my writing this story, and there's never been any allegation of the sort. The press has a right to inform the public, and every single thing in the story was accurate. And no, I have not been sued, because there's nothing wrong with the story.
Louisville, Kentucky, you're next for Jane Mayer, Liberal line.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm very upset about what happened with the Whitewater, Filegate, Travelgate, all these other gates. I think the public were sick and tired of the constant attacks, the attempts to throw Clinton out of office by any means possible that the Republicans had done. And then one day or maybe the next day before Paula Jones's lawsuit, Ken Starr, who has been portraying himself as an honorable man, has Linda Tripp wire Monica. They keep her enclosed in a room with FBI agents. They prevent her from talking to the president. Linda Tripp goes with the FBI agents to the Paula Jones lawyers, who have had contacts with Starr beforehand, gives them the tape and all the other information. Clinton goes into the deposition, and then he ends up lying because all of this set-up information was thrown in front of him. Now, he did lie. He tried to get out from telling the truth about his affair with Monica Lewinsky, but I think Americans were offended by the nature of this setup.
Thank you.
The Republicans have been trying to...
Caller, thanks. Let's get a response at this point.
Well, I guess many Americans were offended by the nature of the setup. Otherwise, maybe there would be more support for impeachment. I think there's a great sense of fair play among the American public, and I think that in fact there've been a number of jury nullifications involving overstepping by prosecutors. And I think that one of the great things about the American public is it has a great sense of what's fair and where to draw the line. And I think a number of people felt that the tactics were not, the means didn't justify the ends in this particular case. But then, as you pointed out, public opinion is shifting somewhat on that too.
From the presidential campaign trail, Allison Mitchell, this morning's New York Times, says John McCain is the latest victim of a pop quiz. And she writes, Senator John McCain had his own pop quiz today and did not fare much better than Governor George W. Bush did when he was unable to name some world leaders. The two questions that he couldn't answer was the Prime Minister of Ireland and later on, the closer to home, who's the governor of Vermont? And now I might mention to you that this is the only newspaper that I found it in this morning, and it's on page A31.
So you think maybe there's a double standard that George Bush's pop quiz would be on, I can't remember, do you think it ran on the front pages when it was...
Seems like we heard a lot of coverage of it. I can't specifically remember front page, but...
I don't think it probably ran on the front page of the New York Times until there was sort of a second or third day analytical story raising questions about his level of preparedness for the office. I think, you know, these things resonate when they play into preconceptions. And there was a preconception that because he's had less time in public life and because he has not had any experience in foreign policy, that Governor Bush was less prepared for the White House, and that was why that story resonated. So I think, you know, I think any intelligent discussion of politics, you know, anybody who was discussing it intelligently would conclude that pop quizzes are not a good way to tell whether somebody really knows the world. I think the reason that the Bush pop quiz also resonated was there was a sense that he seems to have the first level of information sometimes, but no follow-up. And people wonder how deep his knowledge goes of current events.
Our guest this morning is a native of New York City. Her education is from Yale and Oxford. As she mentioned, she was at the Wall Street Journal for a number of years and has been at the New Yorker as top political writer, along with Joe Klein, for 3.5 years now. Next call for Jane Mayer is from University Place, and I can't read the state name. Is it Washington?
Yes, that's correct. It's Washington.
On our moderate line. What's on your mind this morning?
Yes, ma'am. I have a couple comment and a couple questions. I'm a little nervous, but I find that the president and Mrs. Clinton seeking a rebate for her legal fees to be somewhat insulting. But having said that, I have a couple questions. Now, the Clintons had and are receiving contributions to a legal defense fund. And I have never noticed that they claim that on their taxes. Now, if I was to give someone or someone was to give me money in excess of $10,000, I'd have to pay taxes on that. Number one, is that a tax-deductible charity? And number two, if they got rebates for their legal defense fund, what would happen to that money? Possibly to pay for the house in New York? That's all I have, and thank you. Very good show.
Good questions. I'm not a tax attorney. I don't know the tax status of contributions to their legal defense fund. I do think the legal defense fund has raised a lot of questions in a lot of people's minds because it's a way to funnel money to the Clintons without any kind of disclosure. And I think that it's, you know, I mean, you wonder if it's going to turn into a slush fund. I have no idea, but it looks to me like the reaction against the Clintons filing for their legal fees and being reimbursed for them may be so harsh that I have to wonder whether they'll persist.
Here's a political story, but about congressional politics, written by Dick Pullman, who's with Knight Ridder. It's on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning. Consider these political questions, he writes. Why are squads of U.S. senators parachuting into the Silicon Valley for lavish fundraising events? Why are Senate wannabes in New Jersey and New York airing ads that boast about their bona fides? Why is Minnesota's freshman senator squirming over reports that local police may have gone too easy on his son when they found him with marijuana? Why has a Missouri Republican senator unearthed a photo of the state's Democratic governor performing in blackface at a 1960 minstrel show? Because the battle for control of the U.S. Senate, which won't be decided until voters render their verdict until November 2000, has already moved into the bloodletting phase.
The bloodletting phase. Well, if you take each of those cases, case by case, I'm not sure which of them I would think were illegitimate. I think the public has a right to know an awful lot about its candidates. I am not in the prissy camp on this. I really think that, for instance, the Washington Post has been running what I consider fabulous profiles of the candidates that run several days in a row on each person. And I think that character in high office matters quite a bit. And we've seen that in every case that I've watched closely. And you know, certainly it's true in the Clinton presidency. I think it was true in the Reagan presidency, the Bush presidency. You know, So I think the public has a right to know most of this material, and it's not really going to inform voters if all they hear is about the Eagle Scout Awards that the candidates won.
Willoughby, Ohio, conservative line.
The debate yesterday between Gore and God, I'm nervous and I can't think. But it was like watching the Three Stooges with Mr. Russert asking very pointed questions, and the candidates going on about something that had absolutely nothing to do with the questions that were asked, and evading them most pointedly.
Caller, is there a debate format that you think would help you learn? Because we've seen a number of them so far.
I would like to see the public ask the questions. I would like to see more town meetings asking the questions, and making the candidates answer the questions. I watched the Republican debate, and there were questions there that were evaded and not answered. And maybe your guest could give me some direction as to how I should take these.
Did you learn anything yesterday?
Yeah, I did. I learned some things that I really don't like Mr. Gore's idea of pouring more money into education from the federal government. The states need to look at the education in a brighter light, and to start making teachers accountable. They talk about Catholic schools and parochial schools where there is no tenure. If a teacher is bad, they're fired. And the kids learn, and discipline, and in the parochial schools, and the uniforms that they wear, they make the kids more apt to learn rather than to have all these other distractions.
Would you vote for a Democratic candidate for president?
Not that I've seen. I was a Democrat since 1960. I voted for Kennedy my first time out, but Mr. Clinton has made me so angry with the Democratic Party because they hid behind supposed loyalty to the Democratic Party instead of standing up and telling him what a really despicable man he was.
Thank you for your call from Ohio.
Well, I mean, if the public could nail candidates down any better than the press, I think it would be great to hear from the public in debates, too. I mean, I think sometimes people who are not professional question askers do ask very interesting questions. I actually thought that Tim Russert did a terrific job. I think he's very able, and I thought that, I mean, truly nailing candidates down who are at that level of artfulness is, trying to like nail Jello to the wall. I mean, it's hard to do, but I thought there was a lot learned in that debate.
Speaking of debates, Dorothy Rabinowitz covers television for the Wall Street Journal, and she's been watching the Republicans' debates and writes a column about what she's seen so far. She's got a couple of points, and it's a little bit complicated. I hope I do justice to it. She writes that she sees evidently uncontrollable fury being directed at the media by Mr. Bush's supporters and allies. The charge against the media, it appears, is that they have all allegedly fallen in love with John McCain. She writes, it is certainly odd and not a little entertaining to witness the hair-tearing rage now emanating from the Bush camp over the issue of the media's regard for Senator McCain. Odd, especially if, as seems to be the case, Mr. Bush's nomination is virtually assured thanks to a smooth-running and well-funded Republican machine working on his behalf. And she writes, the Bush camp's rages and jibes about the media have grown more and more bitter with every debate, including the one that took place last week, which Mr. Bush's supporters proclaimed a great success, because the candidate faltered less and showed himself slightly more capable of voicing an argument than in the two earlier, more dismal performances. Anything there you want to comment about?
Well, I mean, it's a tradition. If you have a choice between blaming the candidate or blaming the messenger, most campaigns would rather blame the messenger than their own candidate. The truth is that I think Bush enjoyed tremendously positive press before he came out and started debating. And many of the early stories coming out of Austin celebrated him as a sort of a crown prince of politics, and maybe they built up expectations too high. I think a more illuminating story may have been the one in the New York Times over the weekend that has Bush's own people up in New Hampshire criticizing the way the campaign has been conducted and taking a little blame instead of blaming the press.
Spring Hill, Florida, moderate line.
Hi, Susan and Jane.
Hey.
I have a couple questions. One about Whitewater. I heard that the Whitewater land deal happened around '78, and wouldn't that make the statute of limitations? Isn't there a statute of limitations on that? And if so, wouldn't that make the whole investigation somewhat of a fraud? And I have one comment about John McCain. What would you think of a ticket between John McCain and Alan Keyes? Okay, I'll hang up and listen.
I don't know what I would think of a ticket between John McCain and Alan Keyes. I'm at the stage where I'm still getting to know these candidates, and just like the rest of the country, watching them and trying to figure them out. So I don't have a strong opinion of that. And Whitewater, Whitewater came to be known as. It began with one land deal, but it blossomed into a sort of just a complete metastasized legal situation, and I would be hard-pressed to figure out which statute of limitation ran when.
This is Jane Mayer's home base, The New Yorker. At the end of the year, they always do a double issue and fill it full of fiction. The millennial fiction issue is this headline. This particular installment of their fiction. They do this probably twice a year, once in the summer and once in the holidays.
Actually, sometimes 4 times a year.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of reading I haven't gotten to. But you won't find
great stories, though. Read them.
Won't find her byline in this week with the fiction issue, but look for her in the weeks ahead as we get closer to the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucuses. Next call is from Troy, Michigan, Liberal Line. Good morning, Troy. You're on the air.
Good morning. I enjoy C-SPAN.
Thank you.
I'm a little nervous because I'm a first-time caller, but I have a couple of questions I'd like to put on the table for you, Ms. Mayor. I see a lot of discussion today about President Clinton slipping in his popularity. However, I have not heard anyone mention the fact that the Gallup poll did a survey and found him, is it the most admired man in the country? I think that bears mentioning. Also, I am a bit older than you are and have been interested in politics for a long time. I have never seen a president so constantly attacked by people that have committed the same or even more gross, I can't even think of the word.
Indiscretions?
Someone like Mr. Gingrich, Mr. Livingston, Mr. Burton. The Republicans don't have time for Medicare, schools, health care, all these other things. But I see that they have time to attack the president and investigate all the fundraising questions of which they themselves have been guilty.
Thanks, caller.
Well, I think that the caller has a good point about the hypocrisy issue of Clinton's attackers. I think that the jaws have been dropping in Washington about former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich's divorce. People are amazed to learn that he'd been carrying on with somebody other than his wife for 6 years, which meant through the entire time when he was Speaker. I don't think either party has a lock on virtue, but I also think that that there has been a lot of hypocrisy, and I think that's part of the reason that the public rejected the impeachment of Clinton so strongly. I think most people in this country had a sense that there are no saints in politics right now, and probably never have been.
With regard to President Clinton's numbers right now, is it a fair comparison to look at how President Reagan was doing 7 years into his term?
Well, 7 years into his term, Reagan was dealing with the fallout from the Iran-Contra affair, and he reached a nadir in his, actually it may have been in the recession earlier that he reached his absolute low point, but he certainly was not held in high esteem in the 7th year of his presidency. And there may be that. I mean, in that there's kind of a recoiling by the public after there's been a large scandal. First they rally around the president, and then they take it out on him later.
Wilder, Kentucky, conservative line.
Hi, Miss Mayor. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. I've got a two-part question regarding Hillary spending the taxpayers' money to run back and forth to New York. I assume it's on Air Force Two with all the security systems and everything else. I'd like somebody to really get into that, how much money she's spending and what are the tax consequences and all that. And here's another hypothetical situation. Suppose the president had 3 daughters and they were all running for Congress, one in Texas, one in California, and would we have to pay for all those daughters? Why doesn't somebody get into this? I mean, why should my money have to be paid for somebody, what I call my enemy? Please comment.
Well, I'm sorry that you see the First Lady as your enemy, exactly. I mean, the protection of the President and his family has been a long tradition in this country. You know, I think that probably Hillary Clinton would wish that she could get out from under some of the security, but with people disliking her so intensely, maybe it's not a safe thing for her to do.
Well, speaking of the current First Lady, and the Philadelphia Inquirer today, they've got a series, and this installment is a historical one, looking back at Woodrow and Edith Wilson, and with the headline, "The Wilsons Originated the Idea of a Husband-Wife Co-Presidency." It's written by a gentleman named Alvin Felsenberg, who writes and lectures on the American presidency, and he says, as the relationship blossomed, Wilson came to rely on her advice. He made some of the greatest mistakes of his presidency when he disregarded her counsel. Wilson shared with Edith confidential and even classified information. Often he incorporated her suggestions into his official correspondence. Members of Wilson's inner circle, accustomed to confidential meetings with the president, found themselves part of a threesome.
I mean, Wilson is really a case that I think probably goes beyond the Clinton presidency, if that's what the comparison is to, in that Wilson had very failing health towards the end of his presidency, and his wife pretty much took over many of his responsibilities. I don't think we've seen anything like that. I think there's no doubt that Bill Clinton is still very much in charge.
Couldn't happen today, could it? With all the coverage and scrutiny on the White House? That someone could be that incapacitated?
I think many wives, even in the modern era, besides Hillary, I think Nancy Reagan, who you had on earlier, have played substantial roles in their husbands' presidencies. She, as people might remember, fired his chief of staff, Don Regan. I don't think it's at all surprising. It's not like any other, I mean, just like any other marriage.
I actually meant the illness part of it.
Oh, the illness. Yeah. No, I think an ailing president we would know about.
Washington, D.C., Liberal Line. Good morning.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you for C-SPAN, and as somebody from D.C., I just wanted to say it's kind of confusing that a lot of people are still talking about the President Clinton issue. Most people in D.C. still talk about it, but we thought that everybody out in the world never wanted to talk about it before. So it's kind of interesting that everyone still talks about that. The other thing is, and just as a quick statement, it's interesting also that even though I'm a C-SPAN listener and watcher, everyone talks a lot about how there's always one side. You have the Republicans against the Democrats. I think we need to get to a point where we don't have that problem as much, and where we're actually understanding a little bit more. It's amazing to see McCain and Bradley together a week ago. I'm kind of impressed with that. I haven't heard much spoken about that.
Well, I think your caller is onto a larger trend in American politics, which is the de-affiliation with the parties by many voters. Even in New Hampshire in particular, the independent vote is now becoming the largest sector of the electorate, and I think an awful lot of Americans are trying to think more independently and not kind of fall into traditional camps. So I think you're right about that.
Here's some more numbers, also this time from Congress. It's from the federal page of the Washington Post this morning, and it looks at salaries on Capitol Hill. And these are Senate-side salaries, and we're going to have to come in a little close so people can see. The average salary and the most highly paid position in the Senate staff is the Chief of Staff, which is the top job there, averaging $116,000, $573, just a little under what the members themselves can make. And the average number of years in the job, 4.1. The fourth highest paid staffer in the Senate side is their communications director, who on average earns $5,000 more a year than their legislative counsel.
Well, I guess it's a nasty job to have to deal with the press. They have to get paid extra. Those salaries, you know, it depends what you're comparing them to. I mean, the real story, I think, that's more interesting is the kinds of salaries that many of these people make as soon as they leave public office and they go cash in their chips. And there's just a tremendous revolving door between the Hill, people working on the Hill, and people working both in Wall Street and for sort of corporate America as lobbyists here. Ross Perot attempted to raise that issue during his first presidential campaign. Is it something that generally resonates with the voting public? No, traditionally people say it's not something that resonates with voters. They are not moved particularly by these financial issues in politics, particularly about campaign finance. It never gets more than about 3% of the public's vote as the top tier issue. I think these things are very important, and as a reporter, it's very hard to explain to the country in a way that they care about why it's important. Colleen, Texas, for Jane Mayer, moderate line.
Yes, Susan, I was wanting to make a comment about C-SPAN. I like C-SPAN, but, you know, one complaint I have is every once in a while there's a complaint that different callers are calling in on the wrong phone line. What I would suggest that you may want to suggest to Brian Lamb is that put 3 numbers up there, don't designate them, and have people designate what they are, and then you take them by what they designate they are. Because what I've seen is that people call in because you change the numbers ever so often. Then the person at one point in time may be calling on a number that has changed by the designation.
Sure. That's one of the, mixing them up is one way we try to deal with the people who fib about their affiliation. Thanks for this suggestion.
I wanted to ask Jane one question.
Yeah.
And I'm a prior civil service employee, if she says it's not illegal to make public a person's personnel records, I believe you need to go back to the Privacy Act of 1974, that we have to have permission of the individual to release anything in my records to anybody else, and other than to a government entity for a government purpose.
It's, caller, what I was saying is it's not illegal for the press to report on what's in those records. There's you know, in this country we've got a wonderful free press, and you can report on any of those kinds of pieces of information without legal peril. There's just, it's not an issue for a reporter to put accurate information in a newspaper or a magazine, and the information was accurate. The woman was calling me and asking about whether I'd been sued, and there are no grounds to sue a reporter for such a thing.
Did you have to file anything such as a Freedom of Information request to access a personnel file, or could have the Pentagon refused to have answered based on privacy grounds?
It could have refused, but they didn't refuse. So, I mean, my job is to gather information by asking questions and filing FOIAs and, you know, doing whatever I can that's you know, to try to inform the public. And in this case, it was simply a matter of calling the press office at the Pentagon. And as far as I know, there's nothing wrong with that.
Toledo, you're next for Jane Mayer.
Good morning, Jane Mayer. How are you?
I'm fine.
Well, I saw your comments about the hypocrisy of the people that are attacking the Clintons, and I would like to know how the media in general can defend their position of defending Mr. Clinton on every occasion. I mean, this has obviously been the most corrupt and scandal-ridden administration in the history of this country. Yet, anytime something comes up, it's made to look like it's a witch hunt against Mr. Clinton, when the man has obviously been caught with his hand in the cookie jar so many times. And this poll-driven media has swayed the opinion of the American public, or attempted to portray the opinion of the American public as outstandingly supporting this man, when I don't think that's true at all.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I just disagree with the premise of the question. I don't think the press has defended Clinton unnecessarily or even particularly strongly. I think that, you know, we all covered all of his legal problems. And I don't really see a lot of coverage of the personal problems of Newt Gingrich, other than there was a tiny style section piece in the Washington Post.
In about 10 minutes, we begin our coverage of the the biography of Bill Clinton, live from Hope, Arkansas, the final of 41 such programs we've been doing since March. And there on your screen right now, you see a live picture from Bill Clinton's boyhood home in Hope, Arkansas. If you're interested in taking part, we'll have our phone lines open. David Marinas, one of our guests, will be here in our studio to answer questions about the 42nd president, the 41st man to serve in that job. And we've been getting many calls since March about people who wanted to see certain biographies, who missed them and wondered if we were going to replay them. Beginning today, we have all 41 scheduled for the next 10 days. They're all about 2.5 hours long. And if you pick up USA Today this morning, we have reprinted an entire schedule of which days and what times all of the presidents are on. So if you want to tape a particular installment for your own records or for students to use in the class, it's all right there, and you can clip that out of the newspaper this morning and follow along to find the programs you're interested in. Next call's from Los Angeles for Jane Mayer of The New Yorker.
Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Up early.
I have a critique of the press, modern press, that is, from a libertarian perspective, from a true liberal's perspective. It seems to me that today's bipartisan press swims in the same intellectual and moral cesspool as their clients, the Democratic and Republican politicians. Inasmuch as functioning as their role of gatekeeper, the press seems to focus on issues at the level of George W. Bush's alleged smirk and Al Gore's wardrobe, while allowing hidden public policy time bombs to remain hidden until they explode safely after an election. Two examples. In 1988, Bush, Dukakis, and their stooges in the press basically focused on issues at the level of the Pledge of Allegiance debate and ignored the SNL fiasco, which finally blew up after the election, a couple months after, as a $500 billion ripoff. And then the press collectively slapped themselves on the forehead and said, oh my goodness, somebody stole $500 billion. That's an example where you see the entire life cycle. The second example is, it has to do with the ugly and brutal consequences of the war on the people and our Constitution that the bipartisan press calls a war on drugs. Today you have an exploding prison population, which is fueled by drug prohibition. 1970, most people remember what it was like then. You had about 200,000 people who were in prison. Today it's almost 2 million people. 700,000 were arrested in 1997 for marijuana alone. This is, again, another public policy time bomb that is not sustainable, that is a gross violation of Americans' constitutional rights, in my opinion.
Caller, thanks. At that point, let's get a response.
I think there is a lot of silly coverage in politics. I think, there's room for both silly and serious coverage, and certainly the SNL crisis, I agree with the caller, was something that the press missed, and that so did most regulators. But in terms of the drug situation, I think it has gotten some attention, and the drugs czar McCaffrey recently gave a speech where he talked about 2 channels of prison time, one for drug users and one for people with other kinds of problems, and they're talking about much more about rehabilitation now for drug users, which I think is probably a useful discussion to be having. So,
West Kingston, Rhode Island, conservative line.
Yeah, good morning, C-SPAN.
Good morning.
Thanks for the service that you are giving the American people. It's greatly appreciated. I have a question and a comment to make about yesterday's debate between Senator Bradley and Vice President Gore. My comment is, when Senator Bradley said that he sat down with the president in 1993 along with some other senators and urged him to push for campaign finance reform, and nothing happened, and Al Gore said, well, nothing happened because the Republicans all voted against it. Wasn't both houses of Congress controlled by Democrats for the first 2 years of President Clinton's term? And was any campaign finance reform legislation introduced during those 2 years? And one more question. Isn't it rather hypocritical of Vice President Gore to claim that he is for campaign finance reform when he was one of the biggest players in the biggest campaign finance scandal in American history? Thank you.
I think it's a good question. Campaign finance reform is one of those issues in politics where everybody genuflects, almost everybody, maybe except Mitch McConnell in the Senate, but and nobody really does anything much about it. And so the Clinton administration, I think, was guilty of that, just as has been just about every other president in recent time. It's an issue where they want to look good, but they don't want to change the system because they're benefiting from it.
Last call for Jane Mayers from Fairfax, Virginia, here in the Washington area. Moderate line.
Yes, I'm calling about Ms. Mayer's remark about Linda Tripp having been arrested. She neglected to say that that was something that happened when she was a teenager, and as I remember, it was that she shoplifted some small item on a dare from some of her friends. She was not convicted, and it was completely expunged from the court records, which means it should never have been released to anybody. She made it sound like the girl was arrested for some heinous crime, and I would like her to elaborate on that. I think it was very unfair.
Well, I am happy to elaborate because I somehow think that the story has gotten garbled, as the caller suggests, since she has it somewhat garbled. Linda Tripp was arrested for grand larceny. She pled guilty to a reduced offense. Her record was not expunged. It was easy to get. All I had to do was call the police department in her town. She was an adult when she was arrested. And it may have been a long time ago in an unimportant matter. I don't think we should blow these things out of proportion. She was young. But she was required to tell the truth about it to the Pentagon in order to get a top security clearance, which she did, and she did not tell the truth about it.
Our producers say we have time for one last call, and it'll be from Horton, Alabama, conservative line. Good morning.
Good morning, and I know you don't have much time left, so I'll try to be quick. I have 2 points, one on polls and one on George W. Bush's intellect. With regard to polls, I think it was one of those odd cases in our history where the media actually drove the polls by distracting from the federal laws Mr. Clinton broke in the Paula Jones case and made it appear as though he was actually being impeached for having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. And I think the proof of that is that a lot of Americans in the country still today believe he was impeached for adultery. With regard to George W. Bush, and his intellect, you know, we keep hearing he's an intellectual lightweight with regard to foreign policy, when in fact George W. has had one of the greatest, most experienced experts on foreign policy as a teacher than anyone I know, and that's his father, George Bush Sr. Everyone seems to forget that he was raised by a man who happens to be probably one of the smartest men in the world when it comes to foreign policy. And I think the real lightweights in that area would be probably Gary Bauer and Steve Forbes. Thank you.
Well, it's certainly true that that George W. Bush has had good teachers. He's grown up in a very rich environment in many ways. I mean, intellectually, not just financially. And you know, the great thing about this campaign is by the time it's over, we're really going to know who knows what in terms of foreign policy and everything else, because these candidates are really being put through one hurdle after another.
Closing look at the New Yorker magazine, where you can read Jane Mayer's byline as she writes about national politics. As we close, same question I wanted to ask of you that I asked of John Funn, which is, we're at the turn of a century, at the time when one steps back perhaps and thinks about bigger issues in life. What's most on your mind as a reporter as you look at where this country is?
Oh, God, what a good question. You know, I'm struggling with some of the issues that your callers have called in on, which is how to cover politics in an intelligent way, in a way that connects with people's lives, and not get too caught up in the silly hour. So,
thank you for being with us for an hour this morning.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good to be here.
And thanks for being with us this morning. During the week, we have a number of guests, including tomorrow. We'll have someone from Kiplinger Newsletter to talk about tax tips for the end of the year. Until then, you have a good day, and we'll leave you with our American President's Bill Clinton installment from Hope, Arkansas.